20. Part 1. Reflections on a Just Cause. 21. 10 Narratives, Myths and Propaganda. This chapter is specifically intended for readers accustomed to the idea that the Palestine question is the problem of a people under occupation and dates from the Israeli seizure of control over the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. The problem is much older and deeper. In this chapter, I will demonstrate how the origins and the fuller dimensions of the Palestinian cause reside in the Nakba, calamity, catastrophe, an Arabic term, the term denoting the catastrophic consequences of the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. During the 1948 war, the majority of the Palestinians, who had until then accounted for the bulk of the population in historic Palestine, were systematically expelled from their homeland. A stark contrast between Israel's independence and the Palestinian Nakba is not only the most appropriate entry point to the topic, but also an opportunity to examine some Zionist myths and their underlying ideological contradictions in dominant political culture in Israel. Chapter starts with the birth of Israel and ends with the birth of the PLO. Independence. Israel's founding is celebrated in accordance with the Hebrew calendar. It has created a symbolic disjuncture between two dates, the date of Israel's Independence Day, which the state marks on 5 Iyar, in line with the Hebrew calendar, and the date of the Nakba, which Palestinians commemorate on the day the State of Israel was declared, albeit on the 15th of May, in accordance with the Gregorian calendar. A resultant temporal gap, the two occasions are usually about a week apart, serves as an appropriate metaphor for the distance between two irreconcilable narratives concerning the same historical event, that of the colonizer and settler, and that of the colonized and the dispossessed refugee. On Independence Day, the celebratory fervor in Israel far exceeds that of any other country marking its independence, let alone Arab states where such celebrations are comparatively feeble. In Israel, Independence Day constitutes the main holiday. That includes some of the chief rites of the nationalist religion. No religious holiday surpasses it in terms of public participation except perhaps Yom Kippur, which is not festive, but rather a day of fasting, repentance and religious atonement. Independence Day celebrations are not just official but also social and community events. Families attend local festivities with their children while patriotic songs and LMS dominate the airwaves. People visit military museums and listen with rapt attention to accounts of different BALs. State-run and commercial television stations air a panoply of documentaries, panel discussions, and personal interviews, reiterating various aspects of the Israeli narrative of the forceful occupation of Palestine and the Zionist project. Parents visit army units in military camps and organize picnics and day trips in the countryside, or what's love it, and to historic Bala sites. All this 22 feeds into the broader construction of an Israeli collective memory centered on their War of Independence of 1948. It is no coincidence that the official Holocaust Memorial Day is also set according to the Hebrew calendar, on 27 Nisan, about a week before Independence Day. The intended message is clear: the latter is the answer to the former. But the Zionist project to move to Palestine to create a Jewish state was launched long before the Holocaust. In fact, decades after its inception, Zionism was still a marginal phenomenon among European Jews, the primary victims of the Holocaust, and almost non-existent among Mizrahi, Oriental, Jews. Most Jewish Holocaust survivors departed for the US, and the majority of those who ended up in Palestine had no other choice, either because of closing immigration doors or due to lack of financial means. In the late 19th century to early 20th century, an increasingly steady flow of Jewish immigrants made their way from Europe to the US, with numbers peaking in 1905–6. Between 1907–9, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased, but absolute numbers remained very low in comparison. The total number of Jewish immigrants to Palestine from 1905 to 1914 represented only 0.95 to 4.27% of the number of US-bound Jews, a few thousand to Palestine versus tens and hundreds of thousands to the US. Other places, such as Argentina, were also popular destinations for Jewish immigration. Ere the US recovered from its 1910 economic crisis, the number of immigrants to the US increased and immigration to Palestine and Argentina declined. Between 1911 to 14, the rate of immigration to both the US and Palestine increased and continued to rise until World War I. However, in 1921, the US took measures to limit immigration by imposing quotas based on country of birth. 2. The Immigration Act of 1924 further tightened and codified these limits. 3. In mid-1924, following the establishment of the British Mandate in Palestine and after the US shut its doors, Jews started to immigrate in greater numbers to Palestine. But they also migrated from Palestine. Liebman Hirsch stated that, considering the whole period 1922 to 29, Jewish emigration carried off from Palestine 30% of the immigration. It is all the more striking since the Jews entered Palestine with the intention of staying, and since this enormous rate of return is found in Palestine just when immigration elsewhere was made excessively difficult for the Jews. For Table 1.1, Jewish immigrants to the United States and Palestine, 1899 to 1939. Sauer C.E. Liebman Hirschger Alroy 5e American Jewish Yearbook. Year Jewish immigrant Jewish H Jewish immigrant Jewish H Jewish immigrants Jewish immigrant. 23. S to their US 6 Immigra NTS to Palestine 7. S to the US Immigra N5. There is a noticeable correlation between the increase in Jewish immigration and waves of antisemitism in Russia, Eastern Europe and Central Europe. Even before the Holocaust, most Jews seeking refuge during waves of discrimination and persecution or economic hardships immigrated to the US, much like other Europeans at the time. Few Jews chose Palestine as a refuge. As for the relative handful of Zionists that did go to Palestine, they were still akin to a fringe cult. Unlike Jewish religious communities that settled in Palestine over the centuries in order to be in close proximity to their graves of the ancestors, the new Jewish colonists were motivated by a different zeal. EY saw themselves as the vanguard of a national movement intended to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. The early Zionist discourse, in general, disparaged and 26. Derided the character and image of diaspora Jews and scorned the Jews who chose not to join the settlers in Palestine. Diaspora Jews were expected to at least support their Yishuv, 13, and, later, the State of Israel and to lobby for it abroad. National Independence Day celebrations and other festive seasons were carefully designed, since 1951, to create rituals loaded with symbols, codes and emotive memory triggers, the ultimate aim of which was to construct a nation. By nation, here, I mean not a nation-state, but a nation for whom the state must be created, a nation whose diverse histories are reimagined as an indivisible monolithic history, a single nationalized history that, necessarily, yes, even teleologically, leads to a Jewish state. Is type of creation or foundational myths gives rise to a political culture centered around a proprietorial relationship between an ethnic group, or, in this case, ethno-religious group, and the state, and that prioritizes ethnic affiliation, or ethno-religious affiliation, as a criterion for the acquisition of rights. It is little wonder, in such cases, that the poorest and most underprivileged tend to stress their ethnic identity, which is identical with that of the state, as a means to demand equality. Israel's Independence Day is an ideal opportunity to reproduce many of the state's founding myths and narratives, starting with their War of Independence as a war of the few against the many. Others are the rebirth of the Jewish state in Palestine, the narrative of the secular nationalist construction of their new Jew who carries weapons and tills the earth in Eretz Israel, and their negation of exile, Shlilat Harguler, the myth of the apolitical existence of diaspora Jews without a nation. Is negation, which is essential to Zionism, is performed by turning the Jews into a nation like all nations, 14 by establishing a Jewish state, 15, and by repudiating their weak minority status and character of diaspora Jews who could not own and cultivate land or protect themselves. Is all to say that, not only were many Jews against Zionism, those willing to participate in European secular society as integrated citizens, and others wanting to preserve their perceived Jewish exilic uniqueness, but also that Zionism was against many Jews. Zionism openly despised the exilic existence, ways of life, and general character of diaspora Jews. Zionist ideology underwent some transformations since it fused some indispensable religious myths, the eternally promised land and the promise of return, with a secular Southeast-Ler colonialist drive and a militaristic creed in order to found the Jewish nation and establish its link with Eretz Israel, land of Israel. Under the combined forces of nation-building nationalist propaganda, ongoing territorial and secular expansion and growing militarization, the secular myths would grow sacred and the sacred religion would become more and more politicized and secularized. As Israel transitioned to an advanced industrialized consumer society in the 1970s, a further transformation occurred in Zionist nationalist myths. It was a period characterized by an economic and partially political liberalization and the decline of 27. The value society aches to manual labor and agriculture, 16 in contrast to early Zionist doctrine and settler culture. Simultaneously, there were growing trends towards individualism and, among sections of the middle class, towards shirking military service. These complex socio-economic changes took place against a backdrop of de facto colonialist practices carried out under the pretense of reviving an ancient people on their ancient land, yet could only proceed by ignoring the land's history of 2,000 years and the negation of its recent history, the forced evacuation of most of the native population in 1948, and the reduction of the remaining Palestinians to second or even third-class citizens in the Israeli state. However, denial of Zionism's expansionist colonizing nature, the deception and self-deception of Israelis who did not participate in the transfer project of 1948 and Jewish newcomers, Hebrew, Olim, Hadashim, through the myth of empty land became impossible after the 1967 war. When Israel imposed direct rule over millions of Palestinians under its military occupation. Secular, militaristic and politicized religious myths and traditions have been institutionalized by annual repetition and adherence to an official schedule commencing with a day of mourning before the actual celebrations. One ritual preceding Israel's Independence Day stands out in this regard. A day before the festivities is marked by a minute of silence to commemorate the millions of victims of the Holocaust. At the sound of a siren, Israeli citizens stop whatever they are doing and stand completely still wherever they may be, in the streets, factories, schools, universities and public spaces. Cars also stop, and drivers get out to stand. A shrill of the siren drowns out the sufferings of the native people on whose ruins the Israeli state was built. Another significant transformation in the Israeli foundational myths was there. Increasing emphasis on silencing the suffering and on vindicating the expulsion of their majority of Palestinians in 1948. EY continued to feature familiar tropes, such as the heroism of the few against the hostile sea of many, and increasingly combined them with the notions of existential threats, wars of no choice, and more, the imperative of preemptive warfare. The overall thrust was to cast the dispossession as the product of a voluntary act and an inadvertent consequence of Israeli actions. One gets the impression that there is supposed to be some essential difference between systematic expulsion, which did take place, common atrocities and war crimes with the intent to generate panic and act, which did take place, and the displacement provoked by the spread of violence and an advancing enemy army. His myth portrays the Palestinians forced to in 1948 as responsible for their own dispossession. Nationalist propaganda 17 simultaneously charged Arab governments with the blame for the Palestinian act from their homeland during the 1948 war. In all cases, the myths and propaganda covered up the fact that the Palestinians were 28. Then systematically prevented from returning to their homes and villages, and that their properties and belongings were looted and or confiscated by state agencies before being redistributed among the Jewish population. But the biggest cover-up is of the systematic ethnic cleansing of the native population preparatory to the establishment of the Israeli state on terms favoring the Jewish minority mostly comprised of immigrant settlers. 18. It is worth mentioning that, of the 37 signatories of the Israeli Declaration of Independence, only one was born in Palestine. These immigrants unilaterally declared a state that excluded the natives of a country that did not belong to them or they to it. Most of them Hebraized their names or words. Early Zionist ideology and propaganda maintained that the construction of a Jewish nation through the establishment of a modern state outside Europe was the only solution to Europe's Jewish question. Creating the state was the Zionist project's ultimate aim. A state for the Jews 19 was thus both a means and an end, at least according to the founder of the state project, Theodor Herzl, and fellow members of the Central European Jewish intelligentsia who made up the early Zionist movement. From a nation-building perspective in the abstract, such thinking seemed perfectly consistent, at least to its authors from where they stood in turn of their 20th century Europe. In application, their state-building project contained two main tensions that would determine its political and cultural development. ERST was its permanent tension with its surrounding environment, having been implanted on the ruins of the native people, and in total denial of the injustice of the act. Is inherent clash, the conscious and unconscious guilt it has stirred, even in times of peace, and the series of wars, uprisings and acts of resistance generated there. Militarization and security-based regimentation of all spheres of life. 22nd tension resided in how the state and society were perpetually caught between contending perceptions of Israeliness and Jewishness. It seems almost inevitable given the exclusively religious definitions of who is a Jew used to determine citizenship in an ostensibly modern secular entity built by a purportedly secular nationalist movement. Secular Zionism does not distinguish between religion and nation, which could not be separated in Israel as a Jewish state and a state of the Jews. In fact, the problem predates this. Virtually all the Zionist political terms, symbols, names and codes have their roots in religion, and they were instrumentalized in their colonization process. 21. The fact that the Zionist ethos secularized them did not stie their religious connotative force. A Zionist colonialist settler in Palestine 22 was distinguished by several characteristics from the outset. First, early colonial practices included not only building settlements, but also plans to build a separate Jewish economy, conquest of 29. Labor, and to engage in a conquest of the land. The religious term Julat Haradharma, redemption of the land, was also frequently used. Such practices gradually hardened into an organized national community with armed militias that paraded themselves as a national liberation movement. Is necessarily meant that, RST, the existence of an Arab majority was an impediment to be eliminated. Second, that the colonial settler project had no mother colonial country. 23. Third, that a combination of secular socialist discourses, religious definitions of the nation and religious symbols had to be instrumentalized to justify links to the land of Palestine. Moreover, Zionist settler movements that boasted a socialist and sometimes even anti-imperialist discourse were dependent on the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, and cooperation between the Zionist political leadership and Britain and other imperialist superpowers. Such were the early features of Zionism in Palestine. Following the creation of the state, the armed militias that were the main tool for ethnic cleansing became the core of the Israeli army. With time, the Jewish religious character of Israeli nationalism became more and more prominent while the socialist trends and discourse receded as Israel liberalized its economy in the 1970s and 1980s. A subsequent emergence of a large middle class and a consumer-driven urban culture, as well as the rising awareness of quality of life issues and the role of individual choice in a globalizing economy, have not yet succeeded in producing political forces with the ability to counter the militarization of Israeli society and the dread to religious extremist national chauvinism. Israel inherited the political and legal structures of British Mandate Palestine, then gradually changed them over time. Democracy in the Zionist nationalist framework, or Jewish democracy as it continues to call itself, or ethnocracy as some researchers 24 have termed it, was the concept Israeli political and cultural elites adopted when envisaging the kind of citizenship and society they wanted to create. It was their key to absorbing the political and ideological diversity of Jewish immigrants. Inheriting the institutions of the British Mandate was also helpful in this regard. Even if the settler colonial foundation of the state and the occupation were overlooked, as many academics in Israel and elsewhere do, Israel could not be considered a democracy. In its simplest definition, even if we disregard its necessary liberal dimension, modern democracy is not the rule of the ethnic or religious majority over the entire country. 25. A basic component of modern democracy, even in a multinational or federated state where collective rights are also acknowledged, is citizenship, regardless of religious, ethnic or other affiliation. Were we, purely for the sake of argument, to disregard the settler colonial foundation of the state and the apartheid regime in the West Bank and Gaza, Israel officially defines itself as a Jewish 30. and democratic state. 26. It is a de jure ethnocracy with republican rights for Jews and, as Yoav Peled puts it, liberal individual rights for its Arab citizens. 27. However, this too is only theoretical. De facto discrimination policies do not spare individual rights too. Following the components of Israel's nation-building process have remained constant over time. 1. Declared Jewishness of the state precludes all possibility of building a nation for all its citizens and excludes the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their land. 2. Official denial of Israeli nationality and insistence that the Jews in Israel and the rest of the world are the nation whose state is Israel. 3. Judaization of the land through expropriation, settlement and revisionist Judaization of the land's history and identity. 4. Ingathering of the exiles, which translates in legal terms into the right of any Jew, as denied by religious criteria, anywhere in the world, to become an Israeli citizen simply by deciding to go and live in Israel. 28.5. Renaissance of Hebrew. His process has engaged some progressive cultural aspects, such as breaking free of the restrictions of historically transmitted biblical and Talmudic Hebrew, and using Hebrew as the language of instruction in schools and universities. 6. Militarization and security prioritization. In practice, this means physically occupying land, selling it by force while emptying it of its indigenous population, and then protecting the colonial settlements with Zionist militias before 1948 and later with one of the best-equipped armies in the world. It also means maintaining a regional nuclear arms monopoly and qualitative military superiority over the region. In terms of Israeli society, It manifests itself in compulsory military service, the nation's main integration tool, as mentioned above, mandatory reserve duty, and a ubiquitous military ethos. In sum, our 1948 early Zionist ideology intersected with the founding myths of Israel and the corollary myths regarding the forced displacement of the native population and the destruction of Palestinian society to yield an official Israeli state ideology. It conveniently smooths over the inherent contradictions and tensions that arise when building a state on the ruins of the native people, when religion and nationality overlap, when ethnic affiliation becomes the criterion for entitlement to the state and the bond of the individual citizen to the state is marginalized. If these are still existing concrete realities behind the myth, the state-building process also produced a new reality with its own contradictions. It also has its own normality and unreactive normality. I refer to Sabra culture, or Jewish Israeli culture, that is. 31. Reproduced and lives in peace with itself by sustaining the exclusion of the native population and the expropriation and appropriation of their space and their history. Nakba. Zionist movement declared an independent Jewish state in Palestine on the 15th May 1948. On the 15th of May 1947, exactly a year earlier, the UN General Assembly created the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, which was tasked with preparing a report to help to resolve their problem of Palestine on the eve of the end of the British Mandate. In early September 1947, our extensive investigations, the Committee submitted two plans. 1. A majority plan, recommending that Palestine be partitioned into three entities linked together by an economic union to establish an Arab and Jewish state with Jerusalem as a corpus separatum placed under the UN's administrative authority, and 2. A minority plan, establishing a federal state with Arab and Jewish national parts and its capital in Jerusalem. 29. On the 29th of November 1947, the UN General Assembly concluded a 2-month debate with the adoption of Resolution 181-2. It approved, with minor changes, their majority plan for partition and economic union. Under its terms, the mandate would end and British armed forces would gradually withdraw. Arab and Jewish states called for in the plan would be created no later than the 1st of October 1948. Towards this end, Palestine would be divided into 8 parts. 3 parts would be allocated to the Arab state and 3 to its Jewish counterpart. Towns of Jaffa and Jerusalem were designated as the 7th and 8th parts. Former would become an Arab enclave within Jewish territory, and the latter would be administered by the United Nations Trusteeship Council. Jewish Agency 30 accepted the resolution, although this was purely in order to seize a historic opportunity to acquire international legitimacy in order to facilitate its project to establish a Jewish state in Palestine beyond the designated borders in the plan. Resolution was rejected by the Palestinian Arab leadership and neighboring Arab states on the grounds that it violated the right to self-determination in their United Nations Charter. 31 Palestinians could not agree to partition their country or to the establishment of a cellular state on more than half of it. International powers that supported the option of one state in Palestine for both peoples, such as the Soviet Union, eventually concluded that there were no serious political forces on the ground that supported this option. Resolution 181-2 failed to acknowledge established demographic facts. In December 1946, the total population of Palestine was 1,972,000. Arab Palestinians accounted for 69%, 1,364,000 of this score, and Jews for 31%. 608,032 UNSCOP acknowledged that there was Arab majority population of over 1,200,000 and a Jewish minority population of over 600,000, 33, yet it still 32 allocated 55.5% of the total area of Palestine to the Jewish state and 45.5% to the Arab state. 34e following table shows the official UNSCOP on the distribution of the Seled population in the two proposed states, as of the end of 1946. 35 Table 1.2 Distribution of the Seled population in Palestine, 1946. Source: United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP. So, according to the proposed UNSCOP plan, Arab residents would constitute 45% of the population in the Jewish state and 99% of the population in the Arab state. 37 Before the formal declaration of the Israeli state, Zionist militias launched a military campaign of conquest and ethnic cleansing. The Zionist movement had long awaited this moment. It had built national institutions, an exclusively Jewish economy separate from the Arab economy, and the Haganah Armed Force, 38, which was not just the core of a future army, but also an entity poised to step into the state institutions bequeathed by the British Mandate. Seizing the opportunity of the hasty withdrawal of the British who had governed Palestine for 3 decades, the Zionist forces unilaterally declared the establishment of the State of Israel on the 15th of May 1948. Only then did the Arab states respond by declaring a war that they were not ready for. By the time the armistice agreements were signed in 1949, 39 the newly established state controlled 77% of Mandate Palestine. Only 150,000 Arabs somehow managed to remain in the country. In 1967, Israel occupied the rest of the land, thereby reuniting Mandate Palestine under its control. According to the latest statistics reported by the Central Bureau of Statistics, 2021, Israel's total population is currently estimated at 9.5 million, of which 6.9 million are Jews, 74%, and 1.7 million are Arab, over 1/8 of the population. 40 if we add to this the approximately 4.8 million Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, according to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics for 2021, $41 we ended that about 7 million Jews and more than 6.5 million Palestinians live under the sovereign rule of the self-designated Jewish state today. As discussed above, a major part of Israel's post-1948 myth-making and propaganda effort has been dedicated to denial of the Nakba. Israeli officialdom has adamantly refused to acknowledge that the Zionist armies committed ethnic cleansing in the 1948 war, and stuck to the claim that the Palestinians simply or that Arab governments told them to leave their homes until the war ended. It would take a degree of audacity to pretend that the land had been empty where thousands of Jewish families still live in houses that once belonged to Palestinians who became refugees in 1948. This kind of house even has a name in Hebrew. It is called Beit Ravi, an Arab house, in Israel today. Clearly, their land without a people mantra that had been reproduced in Europe during the RST half of the 20th century was no longer sustainable or 1948 when the international community suddenly had to contend with a massive refugee crisis from that heretofore empty land. Israeli propagandists had to do some quick PR work, and the myth of being Arabs, as Palestinian Arabs were called by the Zionists during the war, in Hebrew, Arabim Barhu, upon a command blared from Arab capitals suited the bill. In a 1959 article, the Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi drew on the Arab League's press statements and meeting minutes, as well as Arab and Palestinian newspapers published in the period, to refute the Zionist claim that the Palestinians left their homes because Arab leaders told them to do so. 42 Not only could Khalidi nd no evidence of an Arab evacuation order in the contemporary Arabic sources, he found no reference to such an order in the Haganah radio and correspondence between the Zionist and British leaderships at the time. He noted that the claim RST appeared in 1949, when the refugee issue began to preoccupy Western opinion. He He attributed it to the desire of Zionist leaders to acquit themselves from all responsibility for the crisis. 43. There was no evidence of any such order in Arab radio broadcasts, as Khalidi observed. A day-to-day examination of the broadcasts from the Arab capitals and by secret Arab radio stations in 1948 fails to reveal a single reference, direct or indirect, to an order given to the Arabs of Palestine to leave. $44. Indeed, he found evidence to the contrary, namely, that the broadcasts urged Palestinians to stay. 45. In 1961, the Irish journalist Erskine Childers published Other Exodus in A Spectator with precisely the same conclusion. 46. 34. Since the opening of the Israeli archives, new Israeli historiographical works have appeared, challenging this Israeli myth and the official history of 1948 as a whole. Such writings have continued over the past for decades. 47. Simher Flappen's A Birth of Israel, Myths and Realities, 1987, undertakes a complete overhaul and meticulous deconstruction of Israeli founding myths. His seminal work refuted 7 myths created and perpetuated by the official Israeli history of the 1948 war and the establishment of the State of Israel. These were the claims that 1. The Zionists accepted the UN partition and planned for peace, but 2. The Arabs rejected partition and launched war. 3. The Palestinians acted voluntarily, intending reconquest. 4. All the Arab states united to expel the Jews from Palestine. 5. The Arab invasion made war inevitable. 6. A defenseless Israel faced destruction by the Arab Goliath. And 7. Israel has always sought peace, but no Arab leader has reciprocated. 48. An objective, i.e., critical, reading of the published diaries of contemporaneous Israeli leaders like David Ben-Gurion, Moshe Sher and others supports Flappen's conclusions that these 7 claims are constructed historical claims. Benny Morris acknowledged that Zionist militias expelled Palestinians, but contended there was no master plan to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, despite the fact that population transfer was a concept intrinsic to Zionist ideology, which aimed to transform Arab lands into a Jewish state. Still, as Morris argues, the displacement of the Arab population of Palestine was a necessary precondition for the existence of their Jewish state. 49. Many observers, who were thrilled at Morris' detailed and documented revelations because they were made by an Israeli historian relying on Israeli archives, have not connected the dots between the refutation of Zionist canards based on archival facts and the need to take a commensurate ethical stance. Morris resembled old Zionist leaders who were ready to be forthright about the facts while justifying their deeds at the same time, at least in their memoirs and in internal discussions. Yes, it was an expulsion, but it was still the right thing to do, they argue, because there was no other way to establish a Jewish state in a country populated by an Arab majority. 50. General moral principles or humanitarian values are thereby consciously subordinated to the nationalist value of a Jewish state. If honest acknowledgement of a crime does not stimulate some form of ethical critique or introspection, then it can only signify brazen shamelessness. It is worse than hypocrisy, which at least implies a sense that something wrongful and shameful needs to be concealed. It appears that the dominant contemporary Israeli political culture does not see a need to conceal the truths about ethnic cleansing because it does not consider it, or the plundering and pillaging of Palestinian properties, as 35. Crimes and moral offenses. Evidently, acknowledgement of historical facts can be motivated by moral critique, as well as by moral impairment. Khalidi referred to the systematic plan for ethnic cleansing in an article published in 1961. Plan Dalet, Plan D, was the name given by the Zionist High Command to the general plan for military operations within the framework of which the Zionists launched successive offensives in April and early May 1948 in various parts of Palestine. These offensives entailed the destruction of the Palestinian Arab community and the expulsion and pauperization of the bulk of the Palestine Arabs. 51 He quotes Yigal Allon, the head of Palmach, the elite unit of the Haganah, were before us only days, before the threatening date, the 15th of May. We saw the need to clean out the inner Galilee and to create a Jewish territorial continuity in the entire area of the Upper Galilee. 52 Several historians have challenged Morris, maintaining that there was in fact a master plan for ethnic cleansing and that was implemented. 53 Some argue that the destruction and ethnic cleansing of more than 450 Palestinian villages provide clear prima facie evidence of a systemic plan to displace Palestinians from their homes and lands. 54 Israeli historian Elon Papp, for example, demonstrated how the Israeli Plan D-Dalet was designed as a master plan and carried out by Zionist armed organizations and later, the Israeli armed forces. 55 Nur Masalar held that the expulsion of Palestinians in order to set up the Jewish state not only followed a master plan, but that forced population transfer has deep roots in Zionist thought. 56 Ethnic cleansing extended beyond the borders of the proposed partition lines, and when the 1949 truce agreements were signed, the State of Israel dominated 77% of mandatory Palestine, far exceeding the 55.5% that the UN partition plan had originally allocated to the Jewish population. Khalidi referred to the depopulation and destruction of around 420 Palestinian villages, adding that, by the end of 1948, the largest population displacement in Palestine's history had uprooted between 727,700 and 758,300 Palestinians. 57 According to Papp, the Nakba destroyed 531 villages and emptied 11 urban areas of their inhabitants. In his 2006 book, Papp observed that by October 1948, almost 800,000 Palestinians had been expelled from what would later become known as the State of Israel. 58 What became of the people represented by these numbers? In 2019, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, observed that 5.5 million registered Palestine refugees currently live in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. 59 Today, more than 7 decades after the ethnic cleansing of Palestine took place, it 36 has become an established fact and its denial is a fringe idea. Even in Israeli academia, the main facts are acknowledged either as a result of moral critical thinking or as a sign of nationalist self-condemnance that excuses crimes commis ed for a course. A myth of the few against the many. Months before war was officially declared and Israel declared independence, Haganah armed forces attacked Tiberias, Haifa, Safed and Jaffa and hundreds of villages. In short, ethnic cleansing began on a large scale before the Arab states considered direct intervention. During this unofficial phase of the war, December 1947 to the 15th of May 1948, most of the war effort on the Palestinian side came from volunteer groups of irregular and semi-regular forces that were led by the Arab League military Qawmi. Head of the Qawmi, General Ismail Safwat, submitted a report to the Arab League Council on the 23rd of March 1948 estimating that the number of Arab troops in mandatory Palestine was between 7,700 and 8,000. 60 is included volunteers from Arab countries, as the Arab states themselves refused to participate in the war before the 15th of May, 61 despite the early ethnic cleansing. 62 Ben-Gurion, in his war diaries, stated that the number of Jewish troops on the Biala ELD on the 18th of March 1948 was roughly 15,000, an underestimation. 63 at Jewish forces were nearly double the Arab forces can be partially explained by Kimmeling and Migdal's assertion that the population numbers were deceptive. Jewish immigration had created a society with a disproportionate share of young men of army age 1.5 times the Arab Gore. 64. But a more important reason was that, unlike the native Palestinian society, the Jewish settler society was a highly mobilized one. It was, are all, an intrinsic feature of the nationalist state project. As Avi Schlein put it, Yishuv was beer prepared, beer mobilized, and beer organized when the struggle for Palestine reached its crucial stage than its local opponents. 65. It might be true that, at the beginning, there was no major gap between the Arab and Jewish sides in terms of armament or, to a lesser degree, combat experience. However, the latter achieved superiority over the former, not just in numbers of combatants, but also in the levels of coordination, mobilization and arms supplies. From the socialist bloc in Europe, especially after the Declaration of Independence. 66. Until early June 1948, the Israeli army's greatest weakness was in repo-ware and military equipment. The Arab armies were better equipped, especially with artillery and armored combat vehicles. However, after the RST truce in June 1948, Israel received what it needed in machine guns, armored vehicles, ELD guns, tanks, airplanes and all kinds of ammunition from Czechoslovakia. Czech arms and equipment transfer enabled the Israeli army to decisively tip the scales in its favor. 67. 37. After the imposition of a weapons embargo on both sides, 68. The Arab states that depended on Britain and France did not try to purchase weapons from other sources. EY had neither the will nor the resources. EY also did not want to upset Britain and France. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union broke the embargo through Czechoslovakia, delivering massive arms shipments to the Zionist troops. Even when the Arab states declared war on the 15th of May 1948 and started to deploy units of their regular armies, the Yishuv sustained its numerical superiority. Different sources have estimated the total number of both regular and irregular Arab troops operating in Palestine at between 20,000 and 28,000. 69. In contrast, the Zionist militias, especially the Haganah, which later became the National Army of Israel, or the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, as it is officially named, deployed between 32,000 and 35,000 troops, with numbers rising to 95,000 by mid-October 1948. The Arab states also reinforced their armies, but they could not match this rate of expansion. By mid-October, the total number of Arab combatants did not exceed 53,000. 70. At each stage of the war, as Schleim observes, the Israeli army significantly outnumbered all the Arab forces ranged against it, and by the now stage of the war its superiority was nearly 2 to 1. 71. According to other sources, when the Israeli army was established on the 26th of May 1948, it counted 42,000 recruits and an additional 10,000 also joined in 1 month. 72. In the second half of the same year, 25,000 Jewish Kurds from European countries arrived and joined the new army. 73. By October 1948, Israeli army recruits already numbered 88,000. By December 1948, they were 108,000. 74. Haganah's greatest advantages were a concrete political goal and strong motivation to achieve it, an effective centralized system of command and control, and a clear strategy of conquest to establish a Jewish state. In contrast, the Arab armies lacked a coordinated strategy and a uni-ed command structure. Moreover, there is consensus among historians that Arab political leaders, despite their rhetoric, did not order their commanders to prevent the establishment of the Jewish state. EY were deployed within the borders of the Arab state as denied by the partition plan and never intended to pass those lines. It is essential to understand what really happened, not only to refute Zionist myths, which work has been relatively recently done by Israeli and non-Israeli historians, but also to understand the Arab side. For this purpose, we need to distinguish between agency, the power to make decisions, summon, resolve, and act, and structural aspects so as to address the elephant in the room, the lack of political will and cooperation. A hesitant intervention in Palestine on the part of the weak governments of newly and nominally independent Arab states was mainly the product of domestic 38. Pressures from the prevailing anti-colonial public opinion prevalent, though the inter-Arab connection was also a factor. While the frontline Arab states had formally gained their independence, the independence was still compromised by treaties that allowed the former colonial powers to retain effective control over major policy issues, including military and international affairs. Examples of such restrictive treaties include the 1946 British-Jordanian Agreement, the 1936 Anglo-Egyptian Treaty, and the 1933 British-Iraqi Agreement. Transjordan's King Abdullah viewed the invasion as a means to expand his kingdom. Nevertheless, he did so on the basis of informal understandings with the Jewish Agency and Britain that he would be the master of the land assigned to the Arabs of Palestine under the 1947 UN Partition Resolution. Britain, the Jewish Agency, and Transjordan shared a common interest in their abortion of a Palestinian Arab state that would inevitably be headed by their common enemy, the Muwahhi of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. 75. Other accounts indicate that Jordan tried to intervene in Jaffa before the 15th of May, 1948, but was prevented by British colonial authorities. 76b. Egypt, in addition to pressure from the vibrant civil society and mobilized public opinion that characterized this era of political pluralism and rising political organization and trade union activity in Egypt, King Farouk had another motive to participate in the war: his desire to counterbalance Jordan's role in Palestine. However, he was opposed by members of his government, politicians and officers who feared that the Egyptian army was not sufficiently prepared, which was true. Court officials who supported the king's view argued that there would be very little acting and that military action would be more of a political demonstration because, as they incorrectly assumed, the United Nations would quickly intervene. 77. King Farouk refused to cooperate with King Abdullah in his capacity as commander of the combined Arab forces, even refusing to let him visit Egyptian ELD positions. 78. Iraq. The Iraqi government was facing internal social and political unrest at the time. So, when it took the decision to intervene, it was already conscious of the fact that the Iraqi army could only intervene in Palestine on terms largely set by King Abdullah of Transjordan. 79. Finally, both Syria and Lebanon also felt threatened by Abdullah's long-standing ambition to make himself master of Greater Syria. While the Lebanese deployed an effectively symbolic contribution to the Arab war effort, the Syrian government feared that deploying its newly formed army would expose its southern flank with Jordan. Still, in response to heavy public pressure in support of Palestine, Damascus mobilized a limited number of troops. 80 as the combined Arab troops scrambled to do what? 39. They could. In 1948, the Zionist forces struggled to prevail in what was the deadliest, most demanding war Israel had ever fought in its history. 81 refugees. The birth of the refugee problem was the birth of the Palestinian right of return. On the 14th of May 1948, the UN appointed Count Folke Bernadotte as official mediator for Palestine with the primary mandate of promoting a peaceful adjustment of the future situation in Palestine. 82 In his September report, A648, Bernadotte recommended establishing a special UN Conciliation Commission for Palestine to supervise and assist in implementing the right of return of Arab refugees, with adequate property compensation for those choosing not to return. 83 On the 17th of September 1948, Bernadotte was assassinated in Jerusalem by a member of Lehi, a Zionist terrorist group. A UN Secretary-General posthumously forwarded his report to the General Assembly and, are several discussions. New amendments were added to a draw resolution, the most important of which came from UK and US representatives. Further discussions from the 21st of September onwards, UN. Resolution 194-3 was adopted on the 11th of December 1948. 84 On the 21st of September 1948, the UN Secretary-General forwarded the report to the General Assembly's First Committee. When discussions resumed in mid-November, the UK submit a draw resolution that proposed dropping language referring to Arab refugees so that its provisions would apply to all individuals displaced in the war. Committee also accepted a UK amendment proposing that refugees be allowed to return at the earliest practicable date, rather than a possible date. 85 Syria also submitted a draw resolution, AC.1402, which proposed that a commission should study on the spot and prepare proposals for the establishment of a single state of the whole of Palestine on a canonization or federal basis in which all sections of population in Palestine will participate in rights and duties as loyal citizens of a democratic state with wide autonomous privileges in cantons or areas to be assigned to each of them. His suggestion was rejected by the First Committee. 86 Paragraph 11 of Resolution 194, in its now wording, establishes the right of return and the United Nations Conciliation Commission for Palestine, UNCCP. It resolves that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for loss of or damage to property which, under principles of international law or in equity, should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible, instructs the Conciliation Commission to 40. Facilitate the repatriation, resettlement and economic and social rehabilitation of the refugees and the payment of compensation, and to maintain close relations with the Director of the United Nations Relief for Palestine Refugees and, through him, with the appropriate organs and agencies of the United Nations. 87 Resolution 194-3 was adopted by a majority of 30 countries, within votes against it and 8 abstentions. Israel refused to implement the resolution. In 1950, the Knesset passed the law of return granting every Jew in the world the right to settle in Israel. Its 1952 nationality law then established automatic Israeli citizenship rights for all Jews. 88 Knesset also approved the 1950 absentees property law enabling Israel to directly control and guarantee from the properties of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced Palestinians. 89 Before that, in 1948, the Israeli army issued an anti-infiltration decree, which 6 years later became the Prevention of Infiltration Law of 1954. Il order NES Palestinians who fled to neighboring countries and then tried to return home as infiltrators and authorizes Israel's security forces to detain and forcibly deport them back. 90 Many Palestinian refugees tried to go back to their homes. Benny Morris observes that in the period 1949 to 56, upward of 2,700 Arab infiltrators, and perhaps as many as 5,000, were killed by the IDF, police, and civilians along Israel's borders. A vast majority of these so-called infiltrators were unarmed civilians simply trying to return home for economic and social reasons. 91 Nakba gradually evolved from a historical event into a new reality. It marked a rupture in modern Palestinian history, and there is no national Palestinian political history that is not modern. 92 Before 1948, generations of Palestinians had grown up using the word Nakba for a host of small rural upsets. So-and-so had been struck by catastrophe because of the low rainfall that year or due to a sudden death of a son or daughter. A 1948 generation suddenly found itself forced to grasp an actual collective calamity of an unimaginable magnitude, the loss of their homes, their villages and their country. While they might end shelter of sorts in other countries or long, desperate and dangerous treks, they would end no new home. For months that became endless years, they simply waited for the storm to clear so that they could go back to their own homes, as they had been promised again and again by successive international resolutions. A Palestinian Arab community, both urban and rural, was uprooted from the Palestinian littoral. A Palestinian city was destroyed, and along with it the dream of modernity that had been cultivated between the two world wars, the dream shared by 41. The mandate-era elites and middle classes of building a future Arab homeland and catching up with the modern world. A Palestinian farmer lost his land, his village and his direct relationship with nature. Palestinians were not just dispossessed. Were yanked out of a place and thrown into an aspirational future time that only their middle classes and traditional elites had been politically involved in before the Nakba. Were expelled from over 420 places that had been an integral part of the Levant. Before the exile, during the Mandate period, these were places whose different rural times had been gradually coalescing into a single Palestinian national time under the Mandate's governing institutions and administrative instruments. Refugees were tossed into Arab cities, which accepted the Palestinians when they accepted themselves as Arab. Urban centers. 93 displaced economic and educated elites managed to blend into their respective social classes, mostly without giving up their Palestinian affiliation, which grew stronger in exile. However, the bulk of refugees were relegated to clusters of camps that turned into slums that were shared with rural immigrants from the countryside in the host country, because the new Arab places had yet not merged in one national time. A displaced Palestinian was usually welcome in the Arab countries. In Jordan, the country that annexed the West Bank or the 1948 war, 94 Palestinians were welcomed as citizens and participated actively in building the new state and its economy. Palestinian and Syrian elites helped Abdullah to establish his emirate in East Jordan since its founding in the 1920s. In Lebanon, problems emerged early on due to sectarian cleavages in the country, and again later because of the price paid by local inhabitants when Israel retaliated against Palestinian armed resistance factions based in the country. In times of political crisis, Palestinians could suddenly be perceived as aliens and rejected by the host society. One is reminded here of how a rape victim might be rejected by a patriarchal community despite the injustice enacted on her because the value of masculine honor outweighs human compassion and the will to challenge the original injustice. Politically, solidarity with the Palestinian cause remained a dominant component of the pan-Arab identity. Strength of this component dwindled in tandem with the gradual weakening of that identity over time. A majority of Palestinian refugees were scattered across neighboring countries. By the 30th of June 1951, the UNRWA had assisted 878,000 refugees in Jordan, including 467,000 in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, 200,000, Lebanon, 107,000, Syria, 83,000, and 21,000 internally displaced persons inside Israel. 95 Francesca P. Albanese and Lex Tackenberg, who traced the development of the Palestinian refugee issue, estimated the total number of refugees in 1948 ranged between 711,000 and 774,000, a distance beauty the British are the two ends of this scale. Highlights the challenges involved in collecting and recording historical data. 96 From refugees to organized people. Much has been written on the failure of the Arab-Palestinian leadership during the British Mandate. The politics of Arab political elites, especially in the 1930s and 1940s, was largely shaped by rivalry between two elites, which was sustained and encouraged by the British imperial tradition of divide and conquer. ERST group was made up of supporters of the Mu'ai, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, and partisans of the Supreme Muslim Council, an institution invented by the Mandate. A second group of elites, who were evidently subsidized by the Zionist movement, was headed by Raghib al-Nashashibi, whom the British had appointed mayor of Jerusalem in 1920 to replace the Mu'ai's distant cousin, Musa Kazim al-Husseini. A political leadership was so deeply immersed in this rivalry that it was unable to move Palestinian society forward even as Zionist immigration gained momentum. 97 Interelite con ICT was harmful to the social and political cohesion of Arab-Palestinian society at very critical time. It reached the point that some Nashashibi supporters let themselves be organized by the British colonial authorities into so-called peace bands to help British troops repress and assassinate armed rebels in the Great 1936-9 revolt. 98 Mu'ai, Amin al-Husseini, was the most prominent Ghor in Palestinian politics and regionally regarded as the most important Palestinian leader in the pre-Nakba period. He was nominated Mu'ai by the British after the death of his brother in 1921. Although he lacked the qualifications for the position. 99 According to Rashid Khalidi, he was far from the archetype of the Arab nationalist leader of the interwar period. He was not a noted public speaker, like Saad Zaghloul and Mustafa Nahars in Egypt, or Abd ul-Rahman al-Sharbandar and Shukri al-Quatli in Syria. Nor was he a self-made man, who had risen to prominence mainly because of his personal qualities and his leadership abilities. Self-consciously a member of the Palestinian notability, the Mu'ai adept managed to use the religious institutions he had been placed at the head of to build up a large popular following. 100 His mistakes were numerous, and his political awareness too shallow and traditional to lead a people facing such complex and urgent challenges. When he was persecuted by the British and fled the country in 1941, he thought that it was right to seek refuge and support from Nazi Germany, the enemy of Britain. However, the Jerusalemite leadership was not the only institution or elite formation the Palestinians had. There were also new and nourishing political parties. 43. And civil associations. It is easy to criticize incumbent Palestinian political leadership in retrospect, but the tremendous challenges of Zionist settler colonialism, the British Mandate and the impacts of the European Jewish question would have been overwhelming for any native political leadership in any imperialist colony in the world at that time. Following the Nakba, the ascendant Palestinian urban leadership integrated itself into the wider Arab world. Palestinian elites were instrumental to building up Arab states and capital cities from Amman to Beirut, and Kuwait to other Gulf states. As of yet, there has been no proper, scientific evaluation of this well-known economic, social and professional contribution. It is also the case that, in some of the more conservative states, a patriarchal and narrow local chauvinism has been fostered in which immigrants and refugees are seen as undesirable and therefore their contributions are unlikely to be acknowledged. Be that as it may, it is crucial to underscore the significant contributions of Palestinian refugees to ensure that the refugee issue is placed in its proper political and national context and to avoid reducing it to a humanitarian issue alone. Palestinians were not a burden to their host countries. EY formed an active, productive and hard-working community that never forgot its homeland. PLO was set up by the Palestinian elite and dominated by urban Palestinian nationalist leaders in collaboration with Arab nationalist regimes, thereby tying it to the broader Pan-Arab project at the time. PLO's creation re-acted the widespread assumption that the Palestinian issue was not simply a Palestinian, but also an Arab concern. The organization was established in June 1964. Our extensive debates and deliberations between the Arab states on the question of Palestinian representation. These debates unfolded over a 4-year period, from 1959 to 63. The last one took Place in the RST Arab Summit, held at Nasser's request in Cairo from 13 to 17 January. 1964, is summit resolved that Ahmed al-Shukairi, the representative of Palestine in the Arab League, will continue his contacts with the member states in the Arab League and with the Palestinian people in order to establish the proper foundations for the organization of the Palestinian people, and in order to enable it to fulfill its role in the liberation of its homeland and its self-determination. It was the RST operational decision taken both unanimously and at the highest Arab level on the question of a Palestinian entity since Egypt's earlier efforts to tackle this question in March 1959. 101E Cairo resolution paved the way for al-Shukairi to organize the RST Palestine National Congress, PNC, in Jerusalem in May 1964. In that meeting, the PNC decreed the establishment of the PLO, approving its national charter and other constituent documents and statutes. However, the majority of the 422 Palestinians invited to attend had been nominated by King Hussein of Jordan, whose intelligence 44 agents, moreover, asserted an intrusive presence at the meeting. Furthermore, al-Shukairi had previously reassured Jordan that the proposed entity would not demand any territorial sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It was only on this condition that Jordan allowed the PNC to convene in Jerusalem, where it was officially opened by King Hussein. A composition of the RST-PNC reacted al-Shukairi's reassurances to Jordan. Furthermore, there was a clear bias towards traditional social leaders and sections of the established families of pre-1948 Palestine and towards the propertied and professional elements of the middle class. Al-Shukairi also offered seats to nascent Palestinian groups such as Fatah and the Arab nationalists movement, but refused to acknowledge them formally in the PNC. 102. Despite this bias, al-Shukairi and his colleagues from the educated elite institutionalized the PLO as a complex modern organization with a national council, an executive committee, national funds and several other agencies, including trade unions, and the organization's leadership ran it in a professional manner. A contrasting role was played by other, younger actors who formed militant political organizations, rejected political reliance on the Arab states and advocated armed struggle as the only viable way to liberate Palestine. EY approached Palestinian nationalism from the perspective of an independent-minded political leadership in a tense relationship with the governments of neighboring Arab countries, such as Syria and Jordan, at least when it came to the question of self-representation. EY differed in many other ways from the older members of the PLO, whose founders had been active in Palestinian nationalist politics before 1948, and many had gained experience of party politics or had held office in their quasi-governmental Arab Higher Committee and other bodies in Palestine. 103 EY were from their strata that had occupied the second echelon in the national leadership under Husseini, and that were effectively denied their chance to govern as a result of the Nakba and of the subsequent marginalization of the Arab Higher Committee and all-Palestine government. 104A or 1967, that is, are the defeat suffered by the ruling nationalist bloc of the Arab states which had been involved in the war. The activists who established the various armed factions came to control PLO institutions. These had been teenagers, or at most in their early 20s, in 1948. Most came from a lower middle-class background and had been led from the rapid expansion of the education system in the Arab countries in the late 1940s and early 1950s. In brief, the generation that took control of the PLO in 1968-9 and that subsequently staffed its various departments and agencies was strikingly similar in terms of its social origins to their new 45 elites that came to power in Egypt, Syria, Algeria, and Iraq between 1952 and 1968. 105 emphasis on armed struggle as the only path towards the liberation of Palestine was anchored in a new national charter that revised the founding charter of the PLO. It was infused with Arab nationalist tones, as is evidenced by its name, Ul Mithaq al-Kormi. 106. Wunber al-Rowi, an unpromising land, Jewish migration to Palestine in the early 20th century, Stanford, CA, Stanford University Press, 2014, pp 109-11. 2. For the full text of the 1921 Act, see 6th to 7th Congress, Secretary I, Chapter 8, 1921, Act, governmenttrack.us, the 19th of May 1921, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3hut v1f3 for the full text of the 1924 Act, see 68th Congress, Secretary I, CHS, 185, 190, 1924, Act, governmenttrack.us, May 1924, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3fgbkWF. For Liebman Hirsch, International Migration of the Jews, in Walter F. Wilcox, ed., International Migrations, Volume 2, Interpretations, Cambridge, M.A., National Bureau of Economic Research, 1931, pp 513-15. 5 al-Rowi, page 110. 6 Hirsch, page 474. 7 Iberd, page 514. 8 Statistics of Jews, The American Jewish Yearbook, Volume 42, the 3rd of October 1940 to the 21st of September 1941, 5701, pp 617-18, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3c0m0sj9 Iberd, page 632. 10 Net increase. Statistics are only available for the number of Jews admitted to the U.S. at the ports of New York, Philadelphia and Baltimore. 11 Figures for the number of Jews admitted to the U.S. at all ports. Numbers for the years 1881 to 1907. An approximate score for total Jewish immigration to the U.S. 12 for the period December 1917 to December 1921. 13 Yishuv is the organized Jewish settler society in Palestine before the emergence of the State of Israel. 14 was considered in itself blasphemy by most Orthodox religious Jews at that time, and it still is by many as it connects with the Jewish religious concept of a divinely elected people. The Zionist project as a whole was perceived as an attempt to interfere in the work of God by ingathering the Jewish diaspora before the coming of the Messiah. 15 Amnon Raz developed this encapsulation of the essence of Zionism into a moral disquisition against Zionist practices in Palestine. Drawing on critical philosophical, Walter Benjamin, and Jewish theological thought, he argues that exile is a theological concept that denies the foundation of Jewish existence anywhere, including in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, since the destruction of the Second Temple. It contradicts the nationalist concept of exile while it can converge with a critical secular view of reality. Neither Raz's concept of exile or the critical secular view seek redemption in real history, i.e., the return of the Messiah in mundane times, or realization of an ideal of progress, but rather consider the act of criticizing the present reality and the act of yearning for redemption as redemption itself. Amnon Raz Krokotskin, Exile Within Sovereignty, Critique of the Negation of Exile in Israeli Culture, in Zvi Ben-Dor Benait et al., eds. Scaffolding of Sovereignty, Global and Aesthetic Perspectives on the History of a Concept, New York, Columbia University Press, 2017, pp 393-417. 46. 16 And the hour of cheap labor from the newly occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. 17 A carefully designed Israeli propaganda acquired an academic appellation in the last decade of the 20th century, when it was called a narrative instead of history by post-Zionists with good intentions, i.e., to relativize it vis-à-vis the Palestinian narrative, because it probably did become an unquestioned history for the generations raised on it. So, calling it a narrative was maybe a sign of progress relative to the hegemonial discourse in the Israeli academia. 18c. Walid Khalidi, Plan Dalet, Master Plan for the Conquest of Palestine, Journal of Palestine Studies, Volume 18, Number 1, 1988, pp. 4-33, Walid Khalidi, All at Remains, Palestinian villages occupied and depopulated by Israel in 1948, Beirut, Institute for Palestine Studies, 1992, Nur Masalhar, Expulsion of the Palestinians, A Concept of Transfer in Zionist Political Art 1882-1948, Washington, D.C., Institute of Palestinian Studies, 1992, Elon Papp, E Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, Oxford, One World Publications, 2006. 19. Subtitle of Herzl's book is E State of the Jews, which in German is Der Judenstaat, Versuch einer modernen Lösung der Judenage. A Jewish state is therefore an incorrect translation. C. Theodor Herzl, A Jewish State, an attempt at a modern solution of the Jewish question, Sylvie D. Victor, trans, Jacob de Haas, ed., 3rd ed., New York, Federation of American Zionists, 1917-1896. 20. In a famous eulogy speech by the Israeli military's erstwhile Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan for Roi Rothenberg, a 21-year-old security officer from Kibbutz Nahal Oz killed in an ambush by Fedain, or Freedom Fighters, from Gaza, Dayan, who despised hypocrisy, said it clearly, early yesterday morning Roi was murdered, let us not cast the blame on the murderers today. Why should we declare their burning hatred for us? For 8 years they have been sighing in the refugee camps in Gaza, and before their eyes we have been transforming the lands and the villages, where they and their fathers dwelt, into our state. It is not among the Arabs in Gaza, but in our own midst that we must seek Roi's blood. How did we shut our eyes and refuse to look squarely at our fate, and see, in all its brutality, the destiny of our generation? Have we forgotten that this group of young people dwelling at Nahal Oz is bearing the heavy gates of Gaza on its shoulders? We will make our reckoning with ourselves today. We are a generation that sells the land and without the steel helmet and the cannon's more, we will not be able to plant a tree and build a home. Let us not be deterred from seeing the loathing that is innumbing and ling the lives of the hundreds of thousands of Arabs who live around us. Let us not avert our eyes lest our arms weaken. Is the fate of our generation. Is our life's choice to be prepared and armed, strong and determined, lest the sword be stricken from our st and our lives cut down. Moshe Dayan's eulogy for Roi Rothenberg, April 19, 1956, eulogy, Jewish Virtual Library, accessed at hps://bit.ly/2q2gvj3. 21. For further discussion of this subject see, Nadim N. Rouhana, Religious Claims and Nationalism in Zionism, Obscuring Secular Colonialism, in Nadim N. Rouhana and Nadera Shalhoub Kevorkian, eds. When Politics as Sacralized, Comparative Perspectives on Religious Claims and Nationalism, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 2021, pp. 54-87. See also, Azmi Bishra, A Vortex of Religion and State in Israel, Arabic Majalat Olderasat ol Philistinier, No. 3, Summer 1990. 22. Religious Jewish communities did not settle in Palestine to establish a Jewish state, nor did all the early Jewish settlers of the 19th century. Some were Zionists in various interpretations of the word, but some built agricultural communities because they wanted to practice socialist life outside Europe, or for the sake of individual salvation, or even because of other Jewish spiritual ideals. Some thought of Palestine as a homeland due to cultural links that cannot be denied. Zionists were a minority even among the Jews in Palestine until the intensive settlement activities of the Second Aliyah, ascending immigration, in the beginning of the 20th century, which explicitly declared the goal of building a Jewish state. 23. As individuals, the settlers before 1948 of course had different mother countries, but the Zionist colonial project was not any specie colonial countries project. 47. 24. For example, Oren Yeakel, Ethnocracy, Land and Identity Politics in Israel, Palestine, Philadelphia A. University of Pennsylvania Press, 2006. See a thin, but accurate, definition of ethnocracy according to Nils Buchenschan, a state that allocates citizenship according to specie ethnic criteria, as normally spelled out in a nationality law. Nils A. Buchenschan, State, Power, and Citizenship in the Middle East, a Theoretical Introduction, in Nils A. Buchenschan, Huey Davis and Manuel Hassashian, eds, Citizenship and the State in the Middle East, Approaches and Applications, Syracuse University Press, 2000, page 19. Needless to say, this criterion applies for Israeli ethnocracy, which is much thicker. 25. Given that the politicization of such collective identities is not enshrined in the system. 26. Ryan into the introduction of every Israeli basic law. 27. Yoav Peled, Ethnic Democracy and the Legal Construction of Citizenship, Arab Citizens of the Jewish State, American Political Science Review, Volume 86, No. 2, 1992, pp. 432-43. 28. Process of the ingathering of exiles included Oriental Jews who became a majority of the Jewish population. In general, this majority, which had to give up its culture, was alienated, stereotyped and prejudiced against in the context of a European colonial project. Its situation was the source of social and cultural tension that complicated their nation-building process. Its solution was not integration in a civil framework of Israeli citizenship, nor by producing a civil culture, but in Jewish Israeli nationalism. Even traditional religiousness was subject to Zionization. 29. United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, Question of Palestine, Majority Plan, Partition, Minority Plan, Federal State, UN Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, Report, New York, 1947, accessed at hps://bit.ly/2QSMPFA. 30. Jewish Agency was created in 1929 to represent the World Zionist Organization to encourage Jews worldwide to assist the Jewish settlement in Palestine and to serve as their political arm and operational executive. 31c. UN Department of Public Information, A Question of Palestine and the United Nations, New York, 2008, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3dmkkgz. 32c. Waleed Khalidi, Revisiting the UNGA Partition Resolution, Journal of Palestine Studies, Volume 27, No. 1, 1997, page 11. 33. Question of Palestine, Majority Plan, Partition, Minority Plan, Federal State, UN Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, Report. 34. Resolution 181, 2, C, Ka and Victor, From Coexistence to Conquest, International Law and the Origins of the Arab-Israeli Conflict, 1891-1949, London and New York, Pluto Press, 2009, pp. 146-68, United Nations Partition Plan of 1947 map, UN Department of Public Information, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3xmhl6r. 35. United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, Official Records of the Second Session of the General Assembly, Supplement No. 11, Report to the General Assembly, Volume 1, A364, New York, 1947, accessed at hps bit.ly/3nkdt7h. 36 An additional 90,000 Bedouins, cultivators and stock owners were estimated to be within the Jewish territory in dry seasons. 37 According to the partition plan, the proposed Palestinian state would have a total of 818,000 Palestinians, if the 71,000 Palestinians of the Jaffa enclave were included, and less than 10,000 Jews. Jerusalem was estimated to have around 105,000 Palestinians and 100,000 Jews. As for the proposed Jewish state, it was estimated to have approximately 499,000 Jews and 438,000 Palestinians, that is, if the Jaffa enclave, totally encapsulated by the Jewish state, had been included, as had originally been proposed by UNSCOP, the Palestinians would have outnumbered the Jews in the Jewish state as well. Khalidi, Revisiting the UNGA Partition Resolution, page 11. 38 A main armed Zionist organization before the establishment of the state and its army. 39 1949 armistice agreements were signed between Israel and Egypt on the 24th of February 1949, then between Israel and Lebanon on the 23rd of March 1949, Jordan on the 3rd of April 1949, and Syria on the 20th of July 1949. 48 40 East Jerusalemites are included in official Israeli statistics. 41 Estimated population in Palestine mid-year by Governorate, 1997-2021, database, Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, HPS, //bit.ly/2/BG. 42 Walid Khalidi, Why Did the Palestinians Leave? Revisited, Journal of Palestinian Studies, Volume 34, Number 2, Winter 2005, pp 42-54, 44-54. 43 Iberd, page 43. 44 Iberd, page 46. 45 Iberd, pp 46-7. 46 Erskine B. Childers, Other Exodus, Spectator, the 12th of May 1961, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3U0Ti2c. 47c Silencing, DSD's Concealment of Documents in Archives, Report, Akavot Institute for Israeli-Palestinian Con-ICT Research, July 2019, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3TNNGW7. 48 Simher Flatten, Birth of Israel, Myths and Realities, New York, Pantheon Books, 1987. 49 Benny Morris, Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem Revisited, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 2004, pp 589-90. 50 See the examples in Tom Segev's critical writing of Ben-Gurion's biography. Ben-Gurion and Yitzhak Ben-Zvi considered that the transfer of Arabs was a just action, a necessary action. Tom Segev, A State at All Costs, Life of David Ben-Gurion Hebrew, Ben Shemen, Keter Svarim, 2005, page 430. 51 Khalidi, Plan Dalet, page 8. 52 Iberd. 53 Avi Schlein, Debate About 1948, International Journal of Middle East Studies, Volume 27, Number 3, 1995, pp 287-304. 54 Masalher, Expulsion of the Palestinians. 55 Pap, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, page 28. 56 Masalher, Expulsion of the Palestinians, page 199. 57 Khalidi, All at Remains, page 582. 58 Elon Pap, 1948 Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, Journal of Palestine Studies, Volume 36, Number 1, 2006, page 7, Pap, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, page 13. 59. UNRWA marks 70 years of service for Palestine refugees. UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, the 10th of December 2019, accessed at hps://bit.ly/301tf. Whereas the Battle Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights estimated that there are further 1,161,812 1948 unregistered refugees in these territories. PHROC Nakba Statement, Stop the Ongoing Nakba, Protect Palestinian Refugees. Statement, Battle Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights, May 2019, hps://bit.ly/32 60 Government of Iraq, Report of the Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry into the Palestine Question, Arabic, Baghdad, 1949, page 158. 61 As the Chief of Staff of the Iraqi Army during that war, Marshal Saleh al-Jaburi, put it in his memoirs, the Arab governments did not decide to obstruct the partition plan, they also avoided taking any step that could cause damage to the relations with the British and the Americans. See Saleh Saib al-Jaburi, A Plight of Palestine and Its Political and Military Secrets, Arabic, Beirut, Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, 2014, pp 150-1. His book is an important source concerning the history of the war. Except his diaries, it includes correspondence and meetings protocols of the military and political Arab leaderships. 62 On the Fall of Tiberias, see Mustafa Abbasi, A War on the Mixed Cities, A Depopulation of Arab Tiberias and the Destruction of its Old, Sacred City, 1948-9, Journal of Holy Land and Palestine Studies, Volume 7, Number 1, May 2008, pp 45-80. On the Fall of Haifa, in which British Zionist collusion played a decisive role, see Walid Khalidi, A Fall of Haifa Revisited, Journal of Palestine Studies, Volume 37, Number 3, Spring 2008, pp 30-58, Moai Golani, A Haifa Turning Point. 49. A British Administration and the Civil War in Palestine, December 1947 to May 1948, Middle Eastern Studies, Volume 37, Number 2, April 2001, pp 93-130, Bilal Shalash, Jafar, Blood on Stone, A Jafar Garrison and Its Military Action, Study and Documents, Arabic, Volume 1, Beirut, Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, 2019, pp 213-59. See also, Itamar Radai, Jafar, 1948, A Fall of a City, A Journal of Israeli History, Volume 30, Number 1, March 2011, pp 23-43, Arnon Golan, A Biela for Jafar, 1948, Middle Eastern Studies, Volume 48, Number 6, November 2012, pp 997-1011. On the Fall of Safed, see Mohammed Jamal Baraat, A Fall of Safed, A Beginning of the Fall of Galilee, Arabic, Al-Carmel, Number 57, October 1998, pp 60-74. See also Mustafa Abbasi, A Biela for Safed in the War of 1948, A Revised Study, International Journal of Middle East Studies, Volume 36, Number 1, February 2004, pp 21-47. On the Fall of Acre, see Mustafa Abbasi, A Fall of Acre in the 1948 Palestine War, Journal of Palestine Studies, Volume 39, Number 4, Summer 2010, pp. 2-3. 63c, David Ben-Gurion, A War of Independence, Ben-Gurion's Diary 1948-1949 Hebrew, Gashon Rivlin and Elharner Oren, eds, Volume 1, Tel Aviv Ministry of Defense Publication, 1984, page 310. See also, Abbasi, A War on the Mixed Cities, pp 45-80. 64 Baruch Kimmeling and Joel S. Migdal, A Palestinian People, A History, Cambridge, M.A., Harvard University Press, 2003, page 150. 65 Schlein, A Debate About 1948, page 294. 66 Jalash, Chaim Levenberg, E Military Preparations of the Arab Community in Palestine, 1945-1948, London, Frank Cass, 1993, Moshe Nair, Social Mobilization in the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 on the Israeli Home Front, Shaul Vardi, trans. New York, Routledge, 2013. 67 Haggai Frank, Sten Klemer and Yossi Goldstein, A First Israeli Weapons Procurement Behind the Iron Curtain, A Decisive Impact on the War of Independence, Israel Studies, Volume 22, Number 3, Fall 2017, pp 125-52, Benny Morris, 1948, A History of the First Arab-Israeli War, London, Yale University Press, 2008, page 117. From June 1948, the Israeli army moved onto the offensive, and by the late 1948 Israelis picked off the Arab armies and defeated them one by one. In 1968, Ben-Gurion himself said, Czechoslovak arms saved the state of Israel, really and absolutely. Without these weapons, we wouldn't have survived. See, without these weapons, we wouldn't have survived. Hebrew YouTube, the 12th of May 2015, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3vddyxp. Shimon Peres did not forget to mention this in his book 70 Years Later. Peres was responsible for weapons procurement, and Stalin, as he wrote, ordered Czechoslovakia to purvey the needed weapons when Western countries imposed an arms embargo on all the countries of the region, including their Zionist movement. Shimon Peres, No Room for Small Dreams, Hebrew, Rishon LeZion, Yedid Aronot, and Hemed, 2018, page 50. Rabin acknowledged this fact for decades ago, when the relationship between Israel and the Soviet Union was tense and at its lowest point, emphasizing that without those supplies their independence war could not have been conducted, whatever accounts Israel and the Jewish people have to settle with the communist bloc. The parallel column must bear an entry in large, clear letters. Without the arms from Czechoslovakia unquestionably provided at the best of the Soviet Union, it is very doubtful that we would have been able to conduct our war for independence. Yitzhak Rabin, E. Rabin Memoirs, Berkeley and Los Angeles, University of California Press, 1979, page 34. 68 A United Nations Security Council, UNSC, Resolution 50 on the 29th of May 1948 called upon all governments and authorities concerned to order a cessation of all acts of armed force for a period of 4 weeks, to undertake that they will not introduce clean personnel into Palestine, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Transjordan and Yemen during the cease-re. Should men of military age be introduced into countries or territories under their control, to undertake not to mobilize or submit them to military training during the cease-re, to refrain from importing or exporting war material into or to Palestine, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Transjordan or Yemen during the cease-re. United Nations Security Council, calling for a cessation of hostilities in Palestine, Resolution SRES 50, 1948, the 29th of May 1948, pp 20-21, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3hb66ml. 50. 69 Schleim, A Debate About 1948, page 294, Amitzer Elon, Few versus Many, Weak versus Strong, The Case of the War of Independence, in Alon Kadish and Benjamin Z. Kedah, eds, A Few Against the Many, Studies on the Balance of Forces in the Ba'ales of Judah's Maccabees and Israel's War of Independence, Hebrew, Jerusalem, E. Hebrew University Magnus Press, 2005, page 62. 70 Elon, Few versus Many. 71 Schleim, Debate about 1948, page 294. 72 Amatzir Ilan, Israeli Defense Army and the Arab armies in 1948, in Alon Kadesh, ed. Independence War 1948 to 1949, renewed discussion, Part 1 Hebrew, Tel Aviv, Ministry of Defense, 2004, page 84. 73 Yakov Markovitsky, Fighting Cinder, Recruitment Abroad During the War of Independence Hebrew, Tel Aviv, Ministry of Defense, 1995, page 13. 74 Elan, Israeli Defense Army and the Arab armies in 1948, page 84. 75 Eugene L. Rogan, Jordan and 1948, The Persistence of an Official History, in Avi Schleim and Eugene L. Rogan, eds. War for Palestine, Rewriting the History of 1948, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 2001, page 109. 76 C. Yoner Bent Man, British Military Efforts to Prevent the Fall of Jaffa, April 1948, Hebrew, The Unim Bikumat Israel, Volume 2, 1992, pp 302-3. 77 Morris, 1948, A History of the First Arab-Israeli War, page 185. See also, Omer's Meyer, A Military Force of Islam, A Society of the Muslim Brethren and the Palestine Question, 1945-48, in Eli Kadri and Sylvia G. Hayam, eds. Zionism and Arabiism in Palestine and Israel, London, Frank Cass, 1982, pp 101-18, Mohammed Hassanain Heikel, Roans and Armies, A Crisis of Roans. The Shock of Armies, Arabic, Cairo, Dar es-Sherklo Nasher Woltors, 2009. 78 Rogan, page 115. See also the Iraqi and Syrian positions regarding the leadership of King Abdullah, Saleh Saib al-Jabouri, A Plight of Palestine and its Political and Military Secrets, Arabic, Beirut, Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, 2014, Tahar al-Hashemi, Diaries of Tahar al-Hashemi. 1942-1955, Iraq-Syria The Palestinian Cause, Arabic, Khaldan Sarti al-Husri, ed. and Intro, Volume 2. Beirut, Dar al-Ibi wal-Nasher, 1978, Adil Arslan, Prince Adil Arslan, A Recanted Diaries 1948, Arabic, Youssef Abish, ed. Ul-Muqtara, Lebanon, Ad-Dar at-Takadumir, 2009. 79 Charles Tripp, Iraq and the 1948 War, Mirror of Iraq's Disorder, in Schleim and Rogan, page 135, Hannah Battertu, E Old Social Classes and the Revolutionary Movements of Iraq, A Study of Iraq's Old Landed and Commercial Classes and of its Communists, Beathists, and Free Officers, Princeton, Princeton University Press, 1978, pp 544-66. See also, Heikel. 80 Arslan, Ul-Hashemi. 81 Compared with it, the 1967 war was a picnic. The element of surprise in the Lara War, the technological superiority and conducting the war on the enemy's land dictated the rhythm and outcome of the war, its short duration and the few losses for Israel. 82 Refer to United Nations General Assembly, 186, S2. Appointment and Terms of Reference of a United Nations Mediator in Palestine, Resolution ARES 186 S2, the 14th of May 1948, Para. 2. Accessed at hps://bit.ly/3^VXHU. 83C, United Nations General Assembly Official Records, Progress Report of the UN Mediator for Palestine Submi Ed to the Secretary-General for transmission to the members of the United Nations, the 16th September 1948, Earth Session Supplement Number 11, A648, Paris, 1948, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3TRCZ. 84. For further insight and additional details, see Terry Rempel, Right to Return, drawing paragraph 11 of General Assembly Resolution 194-3, December 11, 1948, Palestine Yearbook of International Law Online, Volume 21, Number 1, 2020, pp 77-197. 85c. Terry Rempel, Resolution 194-3, a retrospective, Ulmachdal, No. 39-40, Autumn 2008, Winter 2009. 51. 86c. United Nations Department of Public Information, Yearbook of the United Nations 1948-49, New York, 1949, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3su6ep. 87c. 194-3. Palestine Progress Report of the United Nations Mediator ARES 194-3, Report, UN General Assembly, the 11th of December 1948, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3abhjnz. 88. Law of Return 5710, 1950, Knesset, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3vcjret, Nationality Law, 5712-1952, Knesset, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3 89. Absentees Property Law, 5710-1950, Knesset, accessed at hps://bit.ly/3ujjd2. 90. Forced Population Transfer, Case of Palestine Denial of Reparations, Working Paper No. 22, Battle Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights, October 2018, accessed at hps://bit.ly/329ph. In implementing this order, Israel arrested many infiltrators, both near the borders and deep inside Arab towns, and imposed heavy NES on them. Security actions accounted for 80% of Israel's detainees and prisoners in 1951. Adel Manor, Nakba and Survival, a story of the Palestinians who remained in Haifa and the Galilee, 1948-1956, Beirut, Institute for Palestine Studies, 2016, page 203. 91c. Benny Morris, Israel's Border Wars, 1949-1956, Arab Infiltration, Israeli Retaliation, and the Countdown to the Suez War, Oxford, Clarendon Press, 1993, page 137. 92 is also the case in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq and Jordan. National political history is modern. Jewish national history is also as modern as the State of Israel. Some would go back to the establishment of the Zionist movement and the RST Zionist Congress in Basel, 29-31 August 1897. Is may be true concerning the nationalist idea, but it should be recalled that the early Zionist movement only represented a small number of European Jews and was only supported by a small minority of Jews elsewhere in the world. In contrast, the Palestinian national movement and the Arab national movement have always been supported by majorities. 93. We will come back to this in the discussion of the Arab question in Chapter 3. 94. West Bank was annexed by Jordan in 1950, however, this step was widely considered illegal by most countries and was only recognized by the United Kingdom, Iraq and Pakistan. The Arab League decided to consider Jordan's annexation of the areas to be a trusteeship until the Palestine case was solved in the interests of its inhabitants. Ayo Benvenisti, International Law of Occupation, Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University Press, 2004, page 108. Joseph Marsad said that the Arab League granted the annexation a de facto recognition and that the US had formally recognized the annexation, except for Jerusalem. See Joseph A. Marsad, Colonial Effects, Making of National Identity in Jordan, New York, Columbia University Press, 2001, page 229. 95C, UN General Assembly, Special Report of the Director and Advisory Commission of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, Official Records, 6th Session Supplement No. 16A, A 1905, Ad. 1 Paris, 1951, accessed at hps://bit.ly/2pjx1pn. 96 However, the UNRWA has no mandate in Egypt or Iraq, so caution is advisable in both instances. Iraq refused to allow the UN agency to operate on its territory and said it would provide assistance itself. Probably less than 13,000 Palestinians entered Egypt in 1948. Most did not remain, despite the fact they were not required to live in camps. Today, the Palestinian community in the country probably has no more than 75,000 members. Francesca P. Albanese and Lex Tackenberg, Palestinian Refugees in International Law, Oxford, Oxford University Press, 2020, pp 35-6, 250, Elabed Orab, Unprotected, Palestinians in Egypt since 1948, Washington, D.C., Institute for Palestine Studies, International Development Research Center, 2009, page 1. From the late 1970s onwards, Egypt became less welcoming to Palestinians, its supposed commitment to international and regional refugee frameworks notwithstanding. Although it accepts that Palestinians are refugees under the relevant UN resolutions, it does not recognize them as refugees under the 1951 Convention, and nor does it recognize the UNHCR's, the UN Refugee Agency, mandate over them. It prevents the UNHCR from registering and assisting them, and as a result the vast majority live under the poverty line. Albanese and Tackenberg, page 244. 97 Kimmeling and Migdal, page 93. 52. 98 Rashid Khalidi, Ian Cage, A Story of the Palestinian Struggle for Statehood, Boston, Beacon Press, 2006, page 66. 99 Elon Papp narrates that, directly after his older brother's death, Ul-Hajj Amin put on the Hammamah, the Hajj's white hat, and began to grow a beard as though he were already the Mu'ai. At day he discarded his European suit forever. Elections were held on the 12th of April 1921. Husam Jarallah received most of the votes while Ul-Hajj Amin only made it to 4th place. He adds that riots took place in support of Ul-Hajj Amin. The British government was now under pressure. On the one hand, there were the results of the preliminary vote for the Mu'ai, while on the other, there was clear popular support for Ul-Hajj Amin's candidacy. A High Commissioner was faced with a dilemma. Ul-Hajj Amin was inexperienced and had taken part in anti-British activities, but there was no denying his family's prominent position in local politics. Samuel met with Ul-Hajj Amin the day before the preliminary vote and was favorably impressed, believing that the young man would use his own and his family's influence to bring calm to Jerusalem and the entire country. Elon Papp, A Rise and Fall of a Palestinian Dynasty, His Anus, 1700 to 1948, Berkeley, CA, University of California Press, 2010, pp 214, 216. 100 Khalidi, Ian Cage, pp 60-1. 101 Moshe Shemesh, A Founding of the PLO 1964, Middle Eastern Studies, Volume 20, No. 4, 1984, page 121. 102 Yazid Zay, On Struggle and the Search for State, A Palestinian National Movement, 1949-1993, New York, Oxford University Press, 1997, pp 98-9. See also, A Palestinian National Council, Arabic Encyclopedia Palestina, the 28th of October 2015, accessed at hps bit.ly/3YT5MCR 103 say, pp 669-70 104 Iberd, page 95 105 Iberd, pp 669-70 106 According to Yazid Say, there was an awareness among the Palestinian armed factions, usually referred to as Fasail, of the domestic, regional and international limitations of the armed struggle against Israel, despite the fact that their military effort never exceeded a limited level in terms of scale and impact. However, the armed struggle was consistently described by the Fasail as the principal, even exclusive, means of liberating Palestine. It is because the armed struggle says served other primary functions, most importantly, elite formation, political legitimation, nation building and consolidating the Palestinian political entity. Violence allowed a unique massing effect in a segmented society, and the heroic imagery and language of armed struggle gave new substance to the imagined community of the Palestinians, who were portrayed as a revolutionary people waging an active struggle to determine their fate, rather than as a mass of helpless refugees passively awaiting charity handouts. Say, pp 667-8.